Welcome to the Paper Trails and Rabbit Holes podcast. You know, I was looking at a pretty staggering statistic to kick off our debate today. A single prompt that you type into an advanced AI model, it uses roughly 10 times the electricity of a standard Google search.
10 times? Yeah, it's actually wild to think about.
Right? And it sounds like a fun piece of tech trivia, but that simple reality of power consumption is currently rewriting the fundamental laws of human wealth. I mean, it is threatening to make the most expensive skyscrapers in Manhattan entirely obsolete. And it's forcing us to completely rethink what it means to build, a true financial fortress.
We are definitely sitting at the edge of this synthetic frontier right now, because for the last century, the playbook was obvious. You bought a piece of dirt, you built a house, you bought shares in corporate America, and you just let time do the heavy lifting.
The classic playbook.
Exactly. But I look at that physical world today, and all I see is friction. I mean, I see a world of dirt and dividends that is actively bleeding value. And I think it's about to be completely overtaken by a new reality of code and cryptography.
And that is exactly the core of what we are putting on the table today, the future of wealth. I'll be taking the position that true resilient wealth is and always will be built on tangible assets. I firmly believe in the historic reliability of the physical world, things you can actually touch, things that have inherent physical utility. And of course, the collective grinding engine of the public markets like the S&P 500.
And I will be taking the position that the physical world is, well, it's fundamentally outdated. It's inefficient, it's highly taxed by both nature and government, and it is heavily encumbered. If you want high-velocity wealth creation in an AI-driven economy, you have to look at digital leverage.
Digital leverage, okay.
Right. You have to understand absolute scarcity and infinite scalability. Because geography, as an economic moat, that's dead.
Well, I know that if you are listening to this show right now and you just spent the last 5 years painstakingly saving up for a down payment on your first house, hearing someone say the physical world is outdated probably sounds completely insane.
I mean, sure, it challenges the dogma.
So let's start right there. At the absolute bedrock of the classic American dream, the house. The reason physical real estate has been the ultimate wealth builder for the middle class isn't just because you can live in it. It's because of a legally protected, highly accessible mechanism of financial leverage. It's essentially a leveraged fulcrum.
A leveraged fulcrum? You're talking about the mortgage.
Exactly. Let's break down the actual mechanics of why this is so powerful for a regular person. If you want to buy a $500,000 house, the bank doesn't require you to have $500,000 in cash.
Right. They typically ask for what, 20%?
20% down. So you put in $100,000 of your own hard-earned money. The bank puts up the other $400,000. Now, if the housing market goes up by a very modest, historically average of 5.24% in a year, the total value of that house just gained over $26,000.
Right. The asset appreciates as a whole.
But here's the genius of the mechanism. The bank took on 80% of the capital burden, but the law allows you to keep 100% of the equity upside.
You don't split it.
You don't split that $26,000 with the bank, so your $100,000 cash investment just yielded a 26% return in a single year. It is really the only socially acceptable form of extreme financial leverage available to the everyday person.
I mean, mathematically, yes.
And beyond that, it functions as a forced savings mechanism. Human psychology makes us terrible at saving cash. A mortgage forces you month after month to pay down principal. It naturally smooths out your spending habits and builds a massive nest egg in the background simply because you need a place to sleep.
I completely agree that the math of a mortgage works beautifully on a spreadsheet, but you are ignoring the massive behavioral and temporal cost of maintaining that leveraged fulcrum.
How so?
Well, you call it a forced savings mechanism. I call it a grueling part-time job that drains your life force. There's a massive mental load tax attached to physical dirt that the traditional playbook never really warns you about.
A part-time job. I mean, owning a primary residence or even a rental property isn't a job for most people. You aren't out there pouring concrete or framing walls every weekend. You live in it or you rent it out.
You aren't framing walls, sure, but you are managing the decay of the asset. The physical world is ruled by entropy. Things break down constantly. If we look at the data for people who use real estate to build wealth, landlords, right? Managing that property eats up roughly 125 hours of your life every single year.
125 hours?
Yes, you're spending about 48 hours just on day-to-day operations, and another 47 hours on leasing, screening tenants, dealing with turnover. If you actually calculate the opportunity cost of an ambitious person spending 125 hours a year dealing with tenants, toilets, and taxes, their so-called sweat equity often completely wipes out the actual cash profit of the rental.
But that assumes you are doing it all yourself. The entire real estate industry has property management built right into it. You outsource the friction, you pay a company 8% of the rent, and they take the 2 a.m. phone calls about a broken pipe.
Even when you outsource it, you do not outsource the financial burden or the mental load. You're still the one who gets the email from the property manager asking you to authorize a $10,000 roof repair.
Well, sure.
And let's talk about the raw capital drain of just keeping the building standing. A recent Zillow analysis showed that the hidden costs of physical real estate, property taxes, homeowners insurance, baseline maintenance, they average nearly $16,000 a year in the U.S.
It takes capital to maintain capital.
But that is over $1,300 a month just vanishing into the ether simply to maintain the physical integrity of the asset. So you have a job that pays you well in equity, but constantly demands cash injections and occasionally forces you to deal with a flooded basement.
I see that $16,000 very differently. That isn't money vanishing into the ether. It is the necessary cost of doing business to protect a multi-million-dollar asset over a lifetime. It provides tangible utility.
But what if you could capture that same wealth growth without the decay?
Without decay. That defies the laws of physics.
It defies physics, but not mathematics. This is the core mechanism of unencumbered digital wealth. When you hold a purely digital asset, whether that's a protocol like Bitcoin or equity in a high-margin digital business, there are zero physical pipes to burst.
Zero pipes. Okay.
Right. The plumbing takes care of itself through code. You have absolute liquidity and zero mental load. You can lock a digital asset away for a decade, and it doesn't rot, doesn't get infested with termites, and it never complains to the local housing authority.
Look, I understand the appeal of an asset that doesn't need a new HVAC system. I really do. But the fact that a house requires physical maintenance is exactly why it retains intrinsic value. It is tied to human survival. People will always need shelter.
But as an investment vehicle?
A string of cryptography cannot put a roof over your family's head. If the broader economy completely seizes up, I can still physically sleep inside my investment. What are you going to do with your unencumbered digital wealth when the power goes out?
If the power goes out permanently, we have much bigger problems than our investment portfolios. We're talking Mad Max at that point. But assuming society continues to function, holding physical real estate as a store of value is highly flawed today. In fact, traditional assets have really become melting ice cubes.
Melting ice cubes? I have a really hard time accepting that phrase for real estate. Historically, dirt has survived every single major economic crash, every depression, every inflationary spiral in modern history. How is a brick house melting?
It survives, but your purchasing power dilutes. We have to look at the mechanism of our monetary system here. We live in a world where the fiat currency supply, the total amount of dollars in the system, it expands by roughly 15% annually over the long term.
The money printer.
Exactly. Because cash is melting in value, people are desperate to park their money somewhere safe. This creates what we call a monetary premium on housing.
Meaning people are buying houses they don't even intend to live in, simply to hide their wealth from inflation.
Precisely. That artificial demand pumps up the price of the home far beyond its actual utility value as shelter. But here is the real problem with that strategy. Real estate is soft.
Soft? You literally build it out of concrete and steel. How is it soft?
Physically hard, but economically soft. Its value can be severely diluted by someone else's actions. Think about it. What happens to your perfectly stable suburban investment if the city council suddenly changes the zoning laws to allow multifamily units on single-family lots?
Multiply goes up.
Right, or what happens if a developer buys the lot next to your luxury condo and builds a 50-story skyscraper that completely blocks your ocean view? Your assets value just plummeted, and you had absolutely zero control over it. The supply of physical real estate can always be manipulated by density, politics, and zoning. There is a finite amount of land, but there is infinite vertical airspace.
So your counter to the political vulnerability of physical land is a purely digital asset.
My counter is absolute, mathematically enforced scarcity. Let's look at Bitcoin. It has a hard-coded limit of 21 million coins. That is all that will ever exist. You cannot rezone Bitcoin to create more.
You can't build a skyscraper on it.
Exactly. You cannot build a digital skyscraper on top of it to dilute the holdings of the people who are already there. Think about the oil refinery analogy. Fiat currency, traditional money, is like raw, leaky energy. As you transport it through time, it dissipates because the government keeps printing more.
Right. Inflation eats it.
But putting your wealth into a perfectly scarce digital asset is like putting it into a sealed, impenetrable vault. It cannot be diluted by mayors or developers or central banks. It is pure, refined monetary energy.
Okay, I follow the logic of the sealed vault, but you're comparing a theoretical digital safe haven to an asset that generates actual, usable cash flow. Yes, Bitcoin is capped at 21 million. I can see that, but it produces absolutely nothing. It just sits in the vault.
It preserves energy.
But you're attacking a straw man here by acting like the only way to build wealth in the physical world is to become a stressed-out landlord fixing toilets. You don't have to fix toilets to capture the growth of the physical economy. You just need the S&P 500.
The index fund, the ultimate default setting for passive investing.
Not just the default setting, it is the ultimate growth engine of human ingenuity. You want a mechanism that doesn't require maintenance. The S&P 500 is a self-cleaning portfolio. You are taking the 500 most powerful, innovative, revenue-generating companies on the planet, and you are letting their CEOs and millions of employees go to work for you.
I don't deny the historical power of the index.
Automatically takes its place. And look at the friction. You were just breaking down the $16,000 in hidden costs for physical real estate. Do you know what the management fee is on a modern S&P 500 index fund?
It's basically zero.
It is roughly 0.03%. If you have a $500,000 portfolio, you are paying exactly $150 a year for a team of algorithms to manage your stake in the global economy. Historically, it has delivered about a 10% return over decades. No zoning boards to fight, no property taxes, no 2 a.m. phone calls, just pure passive compounding backed by actual factories, actual supply chains, and actual consumer products.
A 10% return is fantastic. Really, it is. If your goal is to grow slowly and linearly. But the S&P 500 is inherently tied to the physical constraints of its underlying companies.
What do you mean by physical constraints?
Think about the mechanics of how a legacy corporation grows. If a massive retail giant wants to double its revenue, it has to physically build hundreds of new stores. It has to hire thousands of new cashiers, manufacture millions of physical goods, and load them onto physical trucks, burning expensive diesel fuel.
Right, that's just business.
It's growth by linear addition. The future of wealth creation has moved past that. It is in digital real estate, specifically software as a service or SaaS.
Wait, you are arguing that owning a private software company or a highly specialized digital product is a mathematically superior asset to owning a slice of the 500 biggest corporations in America?
For high-velocity, generational wealth, absolutely. Let's break down the exact mechanism. It's the magic of zero marginal cost of reproduction. If you own a highly successful physical coffee shop and you want to scale up to serve 10,000 people instead of 100 people, you need an army of baristas, 100 times the coffee beans, and you have to sign a lease on a massive commercial building.
The physical overhead of doing business, your costs rise.
They rise almost perfectly in tandem with your revenue. But if you own a software company, say a digital tool that helps businesses manage their HR, you can serve 10,000 people for the exact same marginal cost as serving 10 people.
Well, the only difference is the server space.
Exactly. And server bandwidth is practically negligible because it costs you basically $0 to duplicate a piece of code for a new customer. Software companies operate on gross margins of 70 to 90%.
Which is unheard of in physical retail.
Right. Physical businesses grow by addition. Digital businesses grow by multiplication. It is an exponential curve. Think about it this way. If you want to force the appreciation of a physical house by 20%, you have to spend 6 months and $50,000 physically tearing out the kitchen and putting in granite countertops.
Sweat equity.
But if you want to force the appreciation of a software company by 20%, you tweak the onboarding sequence to drop the cancellation rate, or you push an update with a new AI feature. It takes a single developer 1 week. The leverage is entirely decoupled from physical labor.
I have to challenge the premise that this digital leverage is a true replacement for physical assets. I mean, is a software platform hosted on a cloud server really as real or as defensible as Coca-Cola or Apple?
Why wouldn't it be?
Because you are comparing highly speculative, incredibly fragile digital ventures to the foundational pillars of the economy. The S&P 500 is backed by decades of brand loyalty, patents, massive logistical moats. A piece of clever software with 90% margins can be reverse engineered and cloned tomorrow by 2 kids in a garage using an AI coding assistant.
It can be cloned, sure, but distribution and network effects cannot be cloned easily. The public markets recognize this. This is exactly why public software companies trade at massive multiples compared to physical retailers. The market understands that scale is the only true defense. We are rapidly transitioning from a world that values physical production to a world that exclusively values pure digital leverage.
Well, if we are going to debate what the market fundamentally values, I am going to make my final stand on the single most unbreakable rule of the physical world. 3 words: location, location, location.
Okay, let's talk about location.
You can have all the infinite digital scalability in the world, but human beings exist in physical space. The prime real estate of our world, a corner lot in Manhattan, a beachfront property in Malibu, a commercial hub in London, that can never be cloned by 2 kids in a garage. Its value is inextricably linked to its physical geography. People want to be near other successful people. They want to be near culture, near the center of commerce.
I am so glad you brought this up, because this exact assumption is what artificial intelligence is systematically destroying as we speak. AI is actively decoupling economic value from zip codes.
Wait, how does a language model change the fundamental human desire to live and work in prime physical locations?
Because you have to ask why those locations became prime in the first place. Why does a skyscraper in San Francisco or Manhattan cost hundreds of millions of dollars?
Because that's where the talent is.
Exactly. It's a giant physical filing cabinet for human brains. Historically, a corporation had to warehouse 5,000 junior analysts and managers in the exact same zip code so they could process data, communicate, and output labor. Proximity to talent dictated the value of the dirt, but AI is currently automating roughly 37% of data processing and white-collar administrative tasks.
So the demand for the physical filing cabinet drops.
It plummets. We simply do not need to physically warehouse thousands of employees in the most expensive zip codes on Earth anymore. The output is no longer tied to the geography of the labor force. That century-old mantra of location, location, location. It's actively being replaced by location, resilience, reliability.
Resilience and reliability of what? You mean the digital infrastructure?
I mean power, raw, electrical power. We are seeing the massive rise of the power premium. Let's go back to the hook you opened with. A single query on an advanced AI model uses 10 times the electricity of a traditional search.
Right.
The data centers required to train and run these massive models are consuming unprecedented, just mind-boggling amounts of energy. Do you know what the single most valuable class of real estate is today?
Based on this trajectory, I am guessing it is not a luxury penthouse overlooking Central Park. You are talking about energy grids.
Exactly. The most highly sought-after dirt on the planet right now is a boring, flat plot of land in the middle of nowhere that happens to sit next to a high-voltage electrical substation, or a nuclear plant, or a massive hydroelectric dam,
wired with a fiber optic backbone.
Wow.
Properties with guaranteed high-capacity power interconnection are leasing for a 49% premium over standard commercial real estate. Economic value in the physical world is literally migrating away from the floor space of a downtown skyscraper and into the rack space of an ex-urban data center. It is the end of geography as a primary driver of wealth. The bottleneck isn't the local zoning board anymore. The bottleneck is kilowatts.
That is a profound visual. You are saying that grid interconnection is the new zoning law. The value of the land is entirely dependent on how much electricity you can pull from the earth to feed the digital world.
Precisely. The physical world has essentially been demoted. It is now just a necessary substrate to keep the digital world running.
Okay, well, before we completely abandon the physical world to the server racks, let's bring this down to brass tacks. We've got just a couple of minutes left, so I want to run a quick fire scenario to synthesize this. I am going to throw 2 assets at you. You have to choose one to hold for the next 10 years. No trading allowed.
Put them on the table. Let's do it.
All right. Scenario 1. A fully paid off, consistently cash flowing multifamily duplex in a very stable middle-class suburb in Ohio. Or exactly 1 Bitcoin locked away on a cold storage hardware wallet.
Oh, the Bitcoin, without a second of hesitation. Yes, the duplex in Ohio gives me a 6% cash yield today, but it guarantees me a massive friction cost. It costs me a new roof in year 3, it costs me a dispute with a bad tenant in year 5, and the local county assessor can legally raise my property taxes at any moment to fund a new municipal project.
But it's tangible.
The Bitcoin is absolute, unencumbered scarcity. There are no holding taxes, no maintenance requirements, and no zoning laws. It is pure, sealed, monetary energy. What about you?
I am taking the duplex every single time. Because no matter what happens to the power grid or the regulatory environment surrounding cryptography, human beings will always need a physical place to sleep in Ohio.
True.
That tangible physical utility provides an absolute floor to the asset's value that a purely psychological digital protocol like Bitcoin just doesn't have. I like knowing I can touch my investment.
Fair enough. All right, let's flip it. My turn. You have $500,000. Do you put it into a broad S&P 500 index fund, or do you take significant equity in a highly profitable, deeply niched software as a service company serving the logistics industry?
I am taking the S&P 500. It is the easiest, most frictionless bet on the upward trajectory of human progress ever invented. The software company might boast 80% profit margins today, but it also has a massive target on its back. Every competitor and every new AI coding agent is trying to steal its market share.
It's competitive, yeah.
The S&P 500 gives me 500 proven winners. It self-cleans. It is the ultimate expression of survival of the fittest in the corporate world.
See, I want the software company. I want that exponential growth curve. I want the asset that can mathematically acquire 1,000 new paying customers overnight without ever having to call a real estate broker to rent a new warehouse and without having to hire a single new truck driver. I want zero marginal cost.
It really does come down to a synthesis of 2 completely different operating systems for viewing reality. I remain totally steadfast in the historic reliability, the forced financial discipline, and the unbreakable tangible utility of the physical world. Give me dirt, give me dividends, give me a legally protected leveraged fulcrum, and I will show you 100 years of proof that it works.
And I remain utterly convinced that physical friction is a constraint that mathematics has finally solved. The burden of the physical world, the mental load of maintenance, the melting value of fiat currency, the geographic limitations of the filing cabinet, skyscrapers, it is all becoming obsolete. Digital leverage and mathematically enforced absolute scarcity are the only truly sound ways forward in an economy governed by artificial intelligence.
Well, we certainly aren't going to settle the great debate of dirt versus code today. But whether you choose to build your financial fortress out of poured concrete or cryptographic hashes, that is a structural decision every wealth architect is going to have to make for themselves in this new era.
The paper trail doesn't have to end here, but the descent is just beginning. Find us at PaperTrails&RabbitHoles on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you hunt for the truth. Keep your eyes open. We'll see you at the bottom.